Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get us started. So welcome to everybody who is joining us for our first SciPol 101. We are really excited to share with you guys what is science policy and how to start getting engaged with science policy. I'm Amanda. I am the Director of Memberships at the National Science Policy Network, and I'm really excited to be welcoming all of you guys today. So you'll see in our agenda, which is on the next slide, that we have a couple different speakers that are going to be talking today. So we have Derek, Chanel, and Delara talking to us about different parts of science policy and different careers or ways to integrate science policy into your career. So that's going to kind of be the bulk of our talk, and then I'm going to end a little bit on how Nspn can help you achieve those goals. If all of that sounds really cool and interesting to you, I'm going to end highlighting a few ways that Nspn can help you achieve all of that. And then we also have a worksheet that our superstar director or programming and operations coordinator, Brianna, put together. And so she's shared that in the chat. And so that's a link to a downloadable worksheet that you can follow along with our conversation. And then it'll also have linked to it a few resources that we'll mention throughout the talk, but so that you can also have that on your end and reference back to that at any point, both during this talk and later on during the talk as you're figuring out how you want to engage with science policy. I think that's all I wanted to mention in terms of intro stuff. I hope I'm not forgetting anything. But with that, maybe Derek, do you want to introduce yourself and take us away as we go through our journey in science policy?
Hi everyone, my name is Derek Carter-House, and I am the SciPol Scholar Coordinator for the National Science Policy Network. And there's a couple of things I want to know a little bit about you, find out how many of you are experienced in science policy, how many of you are brand new to it, and kind of the level that we're going to go into this with. So you should be seeing a poll right now. Maybe, yeah, you seeing it? Okay. Just answer these questions and we'll meet back in just a minute. And then Brianna, when you close that, also show the results. I don't know, I think everyone can see the results if you share it.
Okay, we have about 4 more people who need to answer. I'll give you about 10 more seconds and then we'll end the poll. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Alrighty, here are our results. Can you see them on the screen?
Okay, cool. We've got some, about a quarter of you have a lot to share, maybe, or a lot to learn, and then about a third of you have a lot to share. A lot of graduate students here, great. I think this is going to be a really good talk. I think we've got a lot to share with you. Okay. Brianna, could you go back a slide? I can't go backwards. Okay. So, I can't, is this the, it keeps changing.
Do you want the slide before? I'm sorry.
Yeah, yeah, we'll just go to the second slide, please. Whatever was after that intro slide.
This one.
There we go. All right. So I have the privilege of kind of introducing science policy and answering this question for you all: what is science policy? And that is hard to say. I mean, it's like defining what is love. I mean, you know what it is when you see it, but it's kind of hard to put your finger on it. And so my definition that I've kind of been sharing with my students over the years is that, you know, science policy is this idea that you're connecting your expertise, something that you're good at, you know, insert your science here, or just the fact that you are a scientist, and connecting that with the needs of the world around you. So maybe that is company policies, or maybe it's city municipal codes, or maybe it's laws. And so really, science policy is for everybody. So if you are here and you're learning about science policy for the first time, and you want to get an idea of what it is and how you can get involved, rest assured that this is for you. And this is a great place for you to come in as a scientist, where you will be a crucial member of society. And so instead of trying to, you know, define science policy, I wanted to share some stories with you to kind of help you think about what is science policy. And there are two real definitions I want to focus on. And so this idea of science for policy. So it's the use of knowledge to improve decision making. Okay, so as an elected official is making a decision about a law, they have a lot of things to consider, right? The optics or the politics of the situation, their values, the values of their constituents, and the facts and the science behind the issue, right? So science is one element of that decision-making process. I know it's hard for some people to hear because they think science is the answer, the end all, right? And so you have to remember that this is politics. It is an element, and your ability to communicate that science determines the effectiveness at which you can convince someone of your argument. And so who can do science policy? You know, I mentioned everybody, but this story is about a microbiologist who studied microbial genomics. So he sequenced these microbes and put the genomes together and did all kinds of stuff with that. But this is really about his work on another totally unrelated project. So he created, using some big data pipelines, basically looked at where there were various demographics, poor veterans, and veterans that relied on public transportation to, can you go back, Brianna? To access veteran healthcare. And so this is one of the figures from the report, but basically just highlighting that, you know, this microbiologist who is not an expert in veteran affairs, who is not involved in healthcare in any way, who is not an authority on Southern California, can put together a comprehensive report of veteran healthcare based on his ability to do statistical analysis and manipulate big data, right? So all of these veterans are just census data points, which is the same as DNA or you know, RNA in genomes, right? And so everyone can play in the science for policy game. There we go. And then the second thing is policy for science. And so some of you may be saying, hey, wait a minute, we just talked about this. So policy for science is a little bit different than science for policy, right? So if you think about the policy being like the decision-making process, or how we fund or structure future science, is the policy for science. And the story here you can think about is like COVID, right? So if you looked at the publications for COVID in the last 2 years, you would see a very low line, and then it would jump up. And so you can use this tool we have created on the education page of the Nspn website. It's called forecasting. But basically, Many granting agencies and you yourself can do this to kind of predict the future. If you want to inform a policymaker about what the next big thing is, maybe it's facial recognition technology, or maybe it's hacking of biomedical devices like pacemakers or something, right? So you can look at the publication records or look at the funding, and this graphic here shows as the government increases grants for certain projects, you can see the US patents increasing in a trail afterwards. And so where we put our money, where we focus, is determined by the science, but also the money can also pay for the science to happen. So there's policy for science, right? So this is like a very intro level discussion that we can have. But in general, you know, we've got science policy, which is, you know, the science intersecting with policy in its various aspects, okay? And so getting involved is kind of, can you, next slide, please. So getting involved is just a matter of kind of, you know, finding where you can plug in and also educating yourself. So you're going to hear a lot today about, you know, futures that you can have, that you can see for yourself. And you'll see that there's a lot of variety in what you can do. You can get involved today by, you know, taking a look at these educational modules here. We've designed several modules on the education team for you to learn more about the federal government, or for you to learn more about forecasting, right? So all of these things can be found on our website. There's also an Nspn resource guide, and this can help you find fellowships, it can help you find jobs, it can help you find conferences, all kinds of ways for you to plug in right now. And the last thing is a list of policy fellowships. So fellowships are one way for you to get to really where the rubber meets the road, and one pathway for you to creating a career in science policy, if that's what you want. And so, yeah, so I've linked these resources. They are in your work sheet that Brianna created. And we just talked about the SciPol education and the resource guide, and then the comprehensive resources created by Kelly Single. But, you know, as you're listening to the talk today, kind of be thinking to yourself, what level of engagement do I want to have? Do I want to pivot out of my PhD and move into a career? Do I want to stay in academia and be participating, be advising as, you know, an honest broker, someone who doesn't really have an opinion but can provide scientific information to elected officials? Maybe you want to take a little bit more active approach. You want to do some advocacy, right? So you have an opinion and you have the science. So you can make visits, you can learn how to, you know, write letters to congressional members, and you can lead others to advocacy efforts as well. And the last thing of the AAA list is this actuate, right? So making, running for office, seeing the change you want to see being made. You can start tomorrow. There's always vacancies on boards and commissions at your city, in your county, in your state. And so there's lots of resources we're going to give to you today, throw at you. And I hope that, you know, you ask lots of questions and find out, and that this kind of warm introduction can kind of lead you into thinking about, you know, where you want to engage, and then running from there, right? So with that, I'm going to leave you in the capable hands of Chanel Matney, an incredible partner and someone who is very inspirational. So thank you all, and please ask questions if you have any. Otherwise, Chanel, take it away.
Oh, thank you so much for kicking us off, Derek, and I really appreciate the warm introduction. The feeling is certainly mutual. Brianna, I will have you go ahead and advance the slides for me, if that's okay. I'll just indicate next slide. But before, well, let me introduce myself. My name is Chanel Matney. I am the Mentorship and Professional Development Coordinator with Nspn. I am also a state legislative policy analyst in the transportation sector here in California. But I graduated with a degree in neuroscience in Baltimore a few years ago. So it just goes to show that science policy is truly a very multidisciplinary field, and it's often the case that you work on a variety of issues as a science policy professional that might not directly relate to your doctoral expertise. We may have a poll question available. I'm interested in querying the audience. How interested do you think you are right now today, before you really know anything yet, maybe, about a science policy career? If we don't have a poll, all right, we have a poll. Thank you, Brianna. So we have not at all, a little, somewhat, very interested, or full commitment. You're Sci Paul all the way. So go ahead and take a few moments and vote. All right, Brianna, when you're ready, you can close the poll.
All right, I'll give you a countdown of 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
What do we got? Very interested. Excellent. Well, naturally, you guys came to this talk. Well, just as there's a lot of different ways to define, what is science policy, certainly there's no one definition of what a science or who a science policy professional is. So, but one way that I've envisioned it is that the science policy professional is interested in understanding the impacts of how science and technology interact with our laws, regulations, policies, our institutions, and our communities, right? At the core of this is understanding the linkages or the impact or the relationship between STEM and broader society. So of course, as you can see from this little map, there are a variety of ways to do that. What first may come to mind might be, well, making policy, implementing policy. You guys might be familiar with, science advocacy, encouraging the increasing use of data and evidence in our decision making. But science policy also includes things like communications, making science accessible. International science, which is when, science between, foreign countries to achieve a common goal. Of course, there's academic policy, doing, just fundamental policy research. So suffice it to say that the science policy career map encompasses a wide diversity of paths. And one of the sort of exciting things about Nspn and this community is that we're here to sort of help you explore which one of these paths might be a best fit for you, depending on your interest and sort of how you want to have that impact on broader society. Okay, next slide, please. All right, another poll. So when we're talking about science and technology impacts, well, impacts on what exactly? So when you think about a science policy career, what broad issue areas come to mind for you? So for example, water policy, right? That's like a pretty core science policy issue. So I'm really curious to see what comes to mind immediately for you guys. So go ahead and drop some responses in the chat, and I'm curious to see what pops up. I see climate change, forestry management, a lot of climate change, wildfires, absolutely. Very prescient given what's going on the West Coast. Healthcare, food security, science education, reproductive rights. Oh, fantastic, tech security. Oh, keep them coming, okay. So while you guys keep on writing in the chat, Brianna, please advance the next slide. Common science policy issues that often first come to mind for folks include things like health, the environment, how we're using, sharing, and conserving our natural resources, water management, right? These are things that are sort of, easy to imagine as science policy. Next slide, please. It also includes things, however, like transportation, which has an element of, again, being linked to the environment and our energy expenditure. It also means that we might be thinking about agriculture and our use of land, thinking about the sources of our food, the availability of food. Certainly, we're going to be thinking about energy, our energy future, how to acquire it, in a more sustainable way. But what I really liked about the chat responses I'm getting from you guys is that, yes, go ahead, Brianna, next slide. What isn't science policy really? It also encompasses housing, human services, education, data security, elections, national security. So what I really appreciate about what you guys seem to already have a handle on is that nearly all policy will have some fundamental STEM component that will be really important for informing or helping to frame that issue. So if you're really passionate about, someone mentioned reproductive rights or data privacy or the future of emerging technology or poverty, anti-recidivism, things that may be more commonly seen as a social issue instead of a quote science issue. Anytime you're using data and evidence as a lens through which to investigate, a pressing, social or cultural problem, then it becomes science policy. So really a science policy career is a little bit less about what issue you're studying, and it's more about the framework that you're using, one that's very data driven, to investigate that issue. So that means that the world is your oyster. There's a lot of opportunity here to engage in science policy in a way that can be really enriching and invigorating for you as a scientist. Next slide, please. So I showed you that that blowout map in the beginning, and there were sort of 7 core career paths. But for the purposes of this talk, I've sort of condensed it down to 4, just to give you guys a flavor, right? So there's in science policy careers, you can do communications and advocacy. You can do policy development, making policies, and policy analysis, investigating what that policy would mean were it to be effective. You can do science diplomacy, which is sort of like a combination of science with international relations. Or you can be engaged in policy implementation, which is the enforcement, the administration, program management, and oversight, which has an element of accountability. So I'm going to take a few minutes and sort of talk about each one of these in a bit more detail. So perhaps you guys might be the most familiar as grad students with communications and advocacy. This is something that you might even be doing, right now, right? It's all about making science accessible, using science to tell a story and to shape a powerful narrative using evidence, and also using your own persona as a scientist, a human, with a valid perspective in order to get across a point that may be really important to you. And then using science to inform, compelling and persuasive outreach, right? What good is having all of this knowledge stored in the ivory tower if, again, it's not effectuating positive impact in the broader community, right? So just to give you an example of one person who has a really impressive career in communications and advocacy is Dr. Adriana Bankston. She has a PhD in neuroscience, and she's a board of directors of 2 organizations. One is Future of Research, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan advocacy and research organization that thinks about the interests of postdoctoral resources and how they can have a more robust academic experience as they're transitioning from grad school into a professorship. And they do research on sort of the challenges that postdoctoral resources face and use that information to advocate to, say, the NIH or the NSF to call for change. But she's also on the board of directors for a science policy journal, the Journal of Science Policy and Governance. And so they're publishing science policy communications, for a science policy interested audience. And here she works very closely with authors to help craft, this work product, their memo, their op-ed, their research report into a format that it can be published to, a wide audience, for example. Next slide, please. You could do policy development and analysis. And this also might be something that immediately comes to mind when you think science policy professional. You might think, well, you're in the legislature, you're working on bills, sort of pursuant to my lovely Sacramento Capitol House background here in sunny Sacramento. So in this role, whether you're in government or whether you're a non-government entity, this role often involves advising key decision makers, right? Your elected members. You're helping to brainstorm new policy changes to address, pressing problems. Like, for example, policies related to forestry management as a way to mitigate wildfires. You may be called on to provide expert testimony as a key witness, at a hearing. So that's really a very profound opportunity to have impact when, you're called upon to give your professional, scientific, feedback on a policy that's currently, up for debate. Or here, oh, can you go back one slide, please, Brianna? Oops. Yes, thank you. I didn't want to skip over a career spotlight of a colleague of mine, Dr. Kelly Fleming, who has a PhD in chemical engineering, but these days she is a research and policy analyst here in California at the UC Davis Policy Institute for Energy, Environment, and the Economy. And so looking at her LinkedIn, she describes her work as leading policy-related research projects in transportation and energy. She submits research reports, policy briefs, and public-facing communications talking about the impact of energy or transportation statutes, like what impact that will have on the sector, on car manufacturing, on people who are purchasing, new forms of mobility. She's a resource to policymakers and stakeholders to, again, help make that research more accessible, and she's recommending policies at the local, state, and federal level. So one thing you can appreciate about this is that science communication sort of pervades almost all science policy careers because the nature of this work is so incredibly interdisciplinary, and you're often communicating to those who are capable, incredibly smart, but just don't happen to have the unique background in, say, neuroscience or physics or engineering that you have. So in some ways, science policy is about being an ambassador for science in a new context, right? Keeping science relevant, helping to make sure the science matters. Next slide, please. Okay, here's science diplomacy, which is it's a really fun field, it's a new and emerging field. I'm really happy to highlight this for you guys. Science diplomacy is sort of a combination between science and international relations. So you can have science for diplomacy, which is one way of thinking about it, science to advance a country's foreign policy objectives. So some country might say, we want to be totally independent in our energy production, right? We don't want to rely on any other allies for that. So that would you would design your energy extraction programs a certain way. Or it could be diplomacy for science, right? International collaborations in science to address interests that are of mutual interest between nations. Or it could be international science where you're asking a question that's so big and so impactful across multiple nations and communities that it's international science, and that scientists from many different cultures and many different states are working together to address a global need or challenge, like, for example, COVID-19. So examples of science diplomacy at work include when you're thinking about how to mitigate climate change. It doesn't really make sense for one nation to do all that work by themselves. It would have to be a global effort. Science diplomacy is at work when you're talking about infectious disease, for example, because pathogens don't appreciate borders. It's also at play when you're thinking about things like nuclear policy or natural resources and how we share them, how we ship them, how we conserve them. So this is a really exciting field where, again, highly interdisciplinary, highly collaborative, and you're also having to be sensitive to how different cultures may think about a question in a different way, or they may have a different, value set. And so it's a really exciting field. Next slide, please. And then I think this is my final spotlight, policy implementation and oversight. So this is sort of about, okay, you advocated for a program, or you communicated a program, you got the law passed, you discussed the amendments. Perhaps there's an international coalition that was involved in getting this policy made. Okay, now what? Well, you have to implement the darn thing, right? Program management. Who's going to run it? Where's it going to be housed? How is it going to be funded? And then how do you hold that policy implementation accountable to make sure it's working, to make sure you're getting the outcomes that you want? So that's sort of what this bucket entails. Determining the funding, structure, and management of science programs, developing and administering a regulatory framework, and then enforcing accountability. So groups that do this, you might think of CDC, FDA, even NIH and NSF, right, that run, oversee, and fund science programs. That's also science policy. So here, there's another colleague of mine, Seyoon. She's a PhD in pharmacology, and she's currently a biologist at the FDA, I believe, working on tobacco regulation, for example. Next slide, please. Okay, so where can you do science policy? The good news is lots of places. You may automatically think of, oh, Congress or the executive branch, but there's also advocacy organizations and nonprofits. There are think tanks. There are dedicated policy research institutions. You could be at a law firm, right? Law firms that are sort of brainstorming, new laws and regulations. Of course, you could be in academia, or you could be in the private sector in industry. So here I'm just giving you some examples of like nationwide, really well-known firms that are sort of famous for doing science policy, like RAND or AAAS, certainly the National Academy of Sciences. Here are some advocacy organizations like the Union of Concerned Scientists. You can also do policy inside of a for-profit company like Google or Mozilla Firefox, where they often have a lot of data science and privacy, tech science policy. Or here are examples of some a labor organization, the SCIU. They also engage in science policy when they're advocating on behalf of, say, workers. So it's a wide variety, depending again on which issue is sort of at the forefront of your cause. Next slide, please. Oh, wait, back up one slide, please, Brianna. I think there's a poll. Before I advance, a quick poll. What overlap, if we have this poll, what overlap do you all think there is between the skills you need for a science career, traditional science career, and the skills that would be most competitive for you in a science policy career? Do you think there's no overlap at all? Just a little overlap? A moderate amount of overlap? Or just 100% total overlap? They're synonymous. Tell us in the chat. Excellent. So I see huge amount of overlap, moderate amount, 75%. I love people giving me specific numbers. A lot of overlap in skills, 90%. Yeah, okay, next slide, please. There's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of overlap, right? So by virtue of the fact that you're already engaged, many of you, in a some sort of higher education program, a lot of those skills and experiences will absolutely come to bear and be to your advantage in a science policy career, right? You need to be resilient and persistent. Definitely have to be highly interpersonal. This career is all about making, maintaining, furthering relationships as key. Again, it's a very cross-cutting interdisciplinary field. It helps to be naturally curious and to be humble that a lot is unknown, and science is one way of understanding how the world works, but there are other ways to understand it too. And so having sort of constantly a learner's mind, which I think many scientists tend to have, is also very helpful. And then you have knowledge of the scientific process. You know how to read highly technical, complicated material. So when you're going to learn a new field, that will certainly serve you. So you're more prepared than you think, in some. Next slide, please. So let's say you are interested in a science policy career, and I listed all these places you can go: a law firm, a think tank, the halls of Congress. How do you get there, right? You can do science policy in academia. You could do like a policy postdoc, but many folks choose not to take that route. They generally might leave, the traditional academic path. And so if that is something that you're thinking about, don't be intimidated. There's a lot of help, including the folks here at Nspn who can sort of, chart you a path. So there are many things you can do now. So for example, getting involved, getting engaged, join a science policy community of some sort, because relationships are everything. I cannot overemphasize the importance of your network. And so think about causes that you're passionate about. Again, it doesn't have to be like sciencey policy, something that you're passionate about, and find a group in your community that's working on that and bring your scientific skills to bear, right? And so, joining professional societies, teaching and mentoring others, advocating in your local community, informationally interviewing people, we're remote, everyone's on LinkedIn, you know, connect, ask them about how they got into their career. Outreach and communication, you know, finding mentorship, taking part in student government. But because I'm talking, I think, to mostly graduate students, there are some curated pathways specific for PhDs that sort of help ease that transition, right? They kind of give you like a little, you know, guided path to a science policy career, which is one way of doing it. But certainly there are many, many ways to have a thriving career that don't involve a fellowship. So with that, I'm going to hand it off to Delara, who's going to talk more about fellowships. But if you guys are curious about science policy careers or mentorship, you can find me at Nspn, and I'll put my contact information in the chat.
Thank you for the send-off there, Chanel. My name is Delara Curran, and I'm the current chair of the Graduate Education Committee. And so I'm going to sort of start with a poll about, or a true or false question. If you're in a science policy fellowship, you will only be working on policy topics related to your area of expertise. Do you think this is true or false? All right, Brianna, maybe we can do the quick countdown. And I saw there were some other questions there as well. So do you feel like you have to do a fellowship to be successful in policy?
All right, let's take another 5 seconds to get these answered. Number one was just to see after our career talk if you had any change of interest in science policy, and then introducing our fellowship. So 3, 2, 1.
Great. So no, you definitely do not have to do a fellowship in science policy to be successful, and you are not going to only be working on your area of expertise. And that's kind of the beauty of science policy, as been mentioned by previous people who talked today, that you really are building this foundational set of skills, and a science policy fellowship is just one curated opportunity for you to bring that scientific expertise to different branches of government or other organizations, and have the opportunity to do this. Either some opportunities will allow you to do this as a current graduate student or undergraduate student. Others require you to have a terminal degree or doctoral level degree. And again, harping on the same fact that it's all about building your network and finding a way to put those science policy skills you're learning to practice. So over the next few slides, I'm going to be talking to you all about some opportunities that are currently available, but this is not an exhaustive list by any means. Next slide. So one of the fellowship opportunities that you might have heard about before is the American Association for the Advancement of Science, or AAAS's Science and Technology Policy Fellowship. And so these fellows serve 1-year-long appointments in their respective office or branch of government in Washington, D.C. And what I forgot to mention earlier is that many of these science policy fellowships are paid. The AAAS fellowship ranges in stipend from $80,000 to $105,000 a year. So these are, you're getting paid to do this work that you love, which is a great thing to do. And so there are different branches of government that AAAS will have fellows working within. So the legislative fellows will be assigned to either the office of a senator or a representative within Congress, and you'll be one of their primary scientific experts working on a whole range of policy issues that Chanel mentioned earlier. So not just your area of expertise, but the whole gamut, and being sort of that science expert in that office. And so AAAS sponsors 2 legislative fellows each year. However, as I've noted here on the little arrow and the screenshot on the right, is that over 30 partner organizations collaborate with AAAS to have legislative fellows. So no matter what professional society you're a part of, whether that's American Society for Microbiology, American Physical Society, etc., you may have a partner organization that also hosts fellows. And so one thing to note about this fellowship is that, and all the AAAS fellowships, is that you do have to have your PhD in hand prior to applying, but some of the partner organizations may have slightly different requirements, so definitely check in with your partner organization if you're applying through those mechanisms. The executive branch fellowship places you in a federal agency such as the Department of Defense, National Science Foundation, National Institutes of Health. And so you will be in that office writing reports, performing policy analyses, facilitating program development, and there are over 150 fellowship slots through AAAS for that particular branch. And if you have some passion for the judiciary, AAAS does sponsor one judicial branch fellowship every year, and you're placed within the Federal Judicial Center. And so there you help research and evaluate policies that could be facing federal judiciary cases, such as scientific patents or artificial intelligence. Next slide, please. But there's also a number of other federal government opportunities that are outside of AAAS. So the Oak Ridge Institute for Science and Education, or ORISE, also sponsors fellowships within federal agencies. And the nice thing about ORISE is that they have opportunities for undergraduates, graduate students, recent grads, postdocs, and even faculty. And they're available at almost any federal agency you can think of, and their website has a huge list of opportunities. And the range of topics include things from global health security, public health analysis, water and air, drug policy. And so they're at varied locations and varied lengths of time and more rolling admission cycles than the AAAS, which is pretty set, and the cycle goes the same every year. So that's something to keep in mind for again, shorter opportunities. The Presidential Management Fellows Program is a 2-year program that operates out of the Office of Personnel Management. You do have to have completed a graduate degree within 2 years or have all your degree requirements completed by start date. But that is the professional development and leadership experience aimed at developing the next generation of government leaders. And a lot of those individuals who do that program are converted to permanent positions within the agencies that they are assigned to. And then I just have logos from the Department of Defense and Department of Energy here as well, because they also have fellowships within their agencies that are separate from some of these if you are more interested in national security or energy and climate and some of those topic areas. And then maybe you want to be more involved on the state level and a little bit more local and close to home in your communities. The nice thing about that is the sort of drive to have these state fellowship opportunities available is increasing a lot thanks to some of our Nspn members and Nspn committees who are spearheading some of these, creating these coalitions. The California Council on Science and Technology Fellows Program is sort of the longest standing state science policy fellowship, of which a lot of the newer ones are basing their framework. And so each year, 15 fellows are selected for a 1-year position in Sacramento, either working for the state legislature or within a state executive agency. And so as full-time staffers in these opportunities, you'll be doing a lot of the same types of things as you would be in the AAAS fellowship, but it's on the state level. And so I have a couple other logos here. MOST is for the fellowship that's in Missouri. COVES is for the fellowship that's in Virginia, but there are opportunities existing and or are being explored in other states, including New Jersey, Idaho, Colorado. So based on where you are, keep an eye out, because new state policy fellowships are popping up as we speak. And at least for CCST, you can apply prior to the completion of your degree, so long as all your degree requirements are completed prior to starting. And then lastly, I want to highlight and sort of, again, take from what Chanel said about you can do science policy in a lot of different places, and it doesn't just have to be in the formal government agency or structure. And so I wanted to touch on a couple different opportunities. So the Christine Merzion Science and Technology Policy Fellowship is out of the National Academies of Science, and it's for either current or recent graduate students. And so if you aren't familiar with the National Academies, they were created by the federal government to sort of be an advisor on key science and technology policy issues, but they're not a federal agency in and of themselves. And so the Merzion Fellowship Program is 12 weeks long in Washington, D.C., and you're paired with a unit within the National Academies. And these units include things like the Board on Science Education, the Board on Global Health, the Committee on Women in Science, Engineering, and Medicine, or the Board on Higher Education and the Workforce. So there's a really long list of prospective units that you could be paired with for that. And we know we have multiple Nspn members and leaders who are alumni of this program who could speak to its strengths. But the nice thing about this one is that you can do it as a current graduate student so long as you work with your advisor, and so that can get you your foot in the door a little faster if you're interested and have the ability. Research America is an outreach advocacy education organization, and they have fellowship opportunities for both undergraduates and graduate students. And then there's opportunities at foundations. So I just have the Robert Woods Johnson Foundation pictured here, but you might have a foundation that funds some of your research areas and interests, that might have a policy fellowship that you can explore. In industries, that, you know, Merck is a pharmaceutical company, but a lot of them have public policy fellowships. Mozilla, Firefox, and Apple, Google, they also have policy fellowships that are more directed to tech policy. And then, as you know, Derek spearheaded the start of this SciPol Scholars program here at Nspn, but that allows you to take a short sort of course boot camp on science policy, and then we'll pair the scholars with a 6 to 12-month residency position in organizations that partner with Nspn, including annual reviews, Lewis and Burke, and the Federation of American Scientists. So the sky's the limit, really, in opportunities and places that you can do science policy. And so to end off my section here, I want to leave you with a little food-related analogy. And so you've learned a lot today about what science policy is, what career opportunities are available to you, some of the tools and opportunities that can help you get there. But so imagine the experience is like an ice cream sundae, and that cup or that cone, it's really your base of foundational skills that you're learning as a scientist that are broadly applicable and transferable to a lot of different areas. The flavors of the ice cream represent different sectors you could be involved with, you know, say academia, government, industry, and the toppings are all those various opportunities and resources you can pursue and build in your toolkit, whether it's in policy analysis, advocacy, volunteering, etc. And so I like this analogy because you don't necessarily have to have the same type of ice cream every day, and your preferences may change over time. And so sometimes, though, we need a little bit of advice on which store sells the best ice cream or where that unique flavor might be. So maybe we want to know more about what the best balance and recipe is that'll make that perfect ice cream sundae. And that's really where the National Science Policy Network will come in and can help you in providing you with resources, networks, and opportunities. So at this point, I'm going to pass it on to Amanda to talk to you more about what Nspn can do for you.
Thanks, Laura. And I definitely agree. I am now hungry for ice cream, and I might be getting some this afternoon. So I'll see you guys at the ice cream store later, I guess. But yeah, so huge thank you to Derek, Chanel, and Delara for giving us a fantastic intro into what is science policy, ways to engage in science policy, and what a career in science policy might look like, or incorporating a little bit of science policy into your chosen career. If everything that you heard sounds interesting, I just want to give you a little bit about what Nspn does and how you can work with us to kind of further your interests and your development and skills in science policy a little bit more. So I'm going to highlight a little bit about Nspn before we move on to the Q&A section. So a quick overview of Nspn. We see science policy and innovation as these intersecting elements that will lead us to improve and benefit society and the planet. And I'll go on to the next slide. Our mission is to catalyze the engagement of early career scientists and engineers, and that's all of you guys, in policy and the policymaking process. And we do this by focusing on 3 main areas: on fostering a community, training that next generation of scientists and leaders, and engaging and empowering science policy advocates. And so on the next slide, you'll see that a lot of the programming and opportunities that I'll be describing over this last bit of SciPol 101 are going to be over these intersecting these core ideas that we try to incorporate into a lot of our programming and opportunities. And on the next slide, I'll talk a little bit about our goals as an organization. We have a few main goals. So obviously, I mentioned community already. We want to develop this community of science policy leaders. We also aim to be a trusted partner, working with a lot of different scientific and policy organizations, and opening doors for our members to also partner with these organizations as well and be trusted sources of information. We aim to give scientists an effective and an accepted voice in government and media at many levels, including federal and state levels. And all of this together, we hope that this leads to a more science-informed policymaking that benefits society and our planet. So a little bit about Nspn. We are a fairly new organization. We officially launched a bit over 2 years ago, but we are a rapidly growing organization. We have over 800 members and 47 chapters across the US. And just to throw one more number at you, we have given access to our members to over $90,000 in funding for various initiatives that they are starting at their local level. And then I'll go on to the next slide. We are mostly early career scientists, and so we are for early career scientists and by early career scientists, and that includes any STEM grad student or recently graduated professional. But then we also have members and membership category for those that are a little bit earlier on in their careers, meaning these undergrad members, or a little bit later on in their careers for our allied members who are more into their careers and their professions. And so we aim to make membership very accessible, so we do keep our membership dues low. So for our early career scientists, that's $20 a year. Allied members, it's $40, and undergrads, it's $10. If you have any issues with this at all, just email me. My email will be at the end, because we do want to make this accessible to as many people as possible. So no worries about that. And so a little bit about who we work with. Oh, sorry, can you go back one slide? Yeah, a little bit about who we work with. So we partner with a lot of different science and policy organizations, and Nspn as a whole aims to be a trusted partner for a lot of these organizations. And so these are the ones that we are currently partnering with. And of particular note, I'll just highlight two of them. The Journal of Science, Policy, and Governance, which we mentioned early on in our presentation, is a really great path that a lot of our members take to write and publish policy memos on topics of their choices. And I'll also highlight Science Debate, which we are currently working with them a lot right now to have our members ask this election's candidates at state and federal level questions about science and technology issues to better inform their community about where candidates stand on all these issues. So going on to, thanks. So our members, when you become a member of Nspn, you have access to our online community, of course, but also our training and our funding opportunities and all of the initiatives that we've worked hard on developing. And of course, you can come to our symposium, which I'll have a full slide on in a little bit. But I also wanted to mention our chapters are across the United States. And this is basically the science policy groups at a local institution that have decided to affiliate with us and have access to our funding and our training opportunities and come together as a local group to participate in our training opportunities. And in green, you'll actually see the chapters that have affiliated with us over the past year. So it really drives home the point of how quickly we're growing, where we've basically doubled our affiliate chapters over the past year. And so a little bit more about Nspn structure and how you can get involved if you're interested in getting involved. We have committees that are based on specific interests, and also regional hubs. The regional hubs are encompassed by the chapters by geographical areas, and they work on fostering connections and collaborations at the state level and also at the regional level. And then we also have Nspn committees for all of the interests that you might have, such as science diplomacy, communication, graduate education. And so these are focused on developing initiatives and programming and making connections with all the people that are interested in these specific topics within the broader idea of science policy. And on the next slide, I'm going to give you a little bit of a sample of what the current programming that is available, or a little bit of a sample of the current programming for our members. Brianna, if you could go to the next slide. Yeah, thanks. So just a few ideas here. So the annual memo competition is where groups will get together and write a science policy memo. So this is a document with a few suggestions on how policies to tackle a science policy challenge can be developed and implemented. And so if you do want to do a career in science policy, this might be a lot of what you're going to be doing depending on which track you decide to go into or which area of science policy you decide to go into. So it really helps our members start practicing how to do science policy beyond like talking about it and learning about it. So these memos are submitted to the Journal of Science, Policy, and Governance for potential publishing of the top memos. So also awesome to get some of your writing published as an early career scientist. We also have a microgrants program, which, as I mentioned, is funding that's available for our chapters for the various programming that they might want to do more locally in their community that is more driven by the chapter itself. So that's available for our members and our chapters. Our Science Policy Symposium, which I'll have a full slide on in a second, but just in general, it's our flagship annual event where all of our members get together, learn about science policy at various seminars and talks and workshops. So we try to have a combination of learning experience and hands-on experience for our members to work and connect with other science policy enthusiasts and science policy leaders in the broader community. The 2020 election initiative is various programming and various tracks for early career scientists to engage in science and tech topics leading up to the 2020 election. So I mentioned Science Debate as one of the tracks that we have under the Election 2020 initiative, along with an op-ed track that helps scientists publish opinion pieces in local news media outlets to start engaging the public at their local community with issues that might be relevant to their community. And finally, SciPol Scholars, which Derek is leading, and we've mentioned a couple times throughout this presentation. We just launched our first cohort. It's going awesome, so keep an eye out for the next cohort whenever that comes up. And then on the next slide, I want to give a little bit of a teaser of some of our upcoming programming. So we're currently working on coordinating a science policy congressional coalition, and that's going to be with our partners at the Federation of American Scientists, and that will allow the scientists in our network to suggest questions and topics for relevant congressional hearings that are happening. We also have the SciPol Mentor Network, with which our very own Chanel is working on. So that'll be developed over the next few months and is really exciting. Delara mentioned the state level fellowships committee, which is working on expanding the available fellowships at the state level government across the US. And finally, we aim to develop a national SciPol week to drive the coordinated efforts from our chapters and our members towards the government. And so I alluded to this a bit already, but we do have our National Science Policy Symposium happening this November. It's free to members, and we are super pumped about all the programming that we have around our theme, Science Policy for Racial Justice. There's a lot more information on our website, which I'll add to the chat, or maybe Brianna can add it. It's scipolsymposium.org. But we're going to have some awesome workshops and seminars to do a little bit of learning, hands-on learning and workshop is going to be, oh, I should have mentioned this at the beginning. It's transition to fully virtual. So we're going to have some small group workshops to try to have a really genuine, like good learning experience for our members, in addition to larger keynote talks in addition to a few awesome keynote talks that we're going to be having. And I think with that, I'm going to end all of the Nspn highlights and ways to engage with Nspn. My contact information is on the screen. I'm the Director of Memberships, Amanda, and if you have any questions at all, or if I can direct you to someone who can answer your question, please email me, amanda@scipolnetwork.org. And then on the next slide, I just have the social media information. If you are enjoying everything that you're hearing about Nspn and want to keep in touch with all of our future events and all of the other ways to get connected to us. But I think that's it. We might go a little bit over, but we have a couple minutes for Q&A if anybody does have any Q&As. Yeah, I don't know, Brianna, did you see any questions that we can answer in the next few minutes?
No, I don't see any right now, but feel free, anyone, if you have questions.
Yeah, send them in the chat. If you have any questions for Derek, Chanel, or Delara, or for myself, let us know. There's a Q&A and then there's also a chat. So I'm not sure which one, I guess either one is fine.
Okay. We have one question about how can Nsbn members get plugged into the Mentor Network?
Yeah, so that's still in development by Chanel. So maybe Chanel, do you want to give a little bit more of an insight on that?
Yes, please stay tuned. What we're doing right now is sort of building out a mentorship network and sort of thinking about divvying them by the skill set that they may provide, by the science policy field that they're in, or perhaps by a personal demographic that they may identify with. Let's say they're a woman, or they're a person of color, or they're an immigrant, however. And so mentorship takes many forms. It can be mentorship because you're pursuing an opportunity, like a job or a fellowship. It could be mentorship for the purposes of skills mastery or skills development. I want to get better at writing or public speaking or negotiating, or it could be mentorship because, you're a member of a group or a demographic that may have unique challenges, you just as a professional, and so perhaps you're looking for someone that could help give you their perspective on how they're addressing those challenges. And so I consider myself sort of one of many super connectors in the science policy world, and so I'm reaching out to other super connectors and sort of building out folks that we think would be strong, engaged mentors for this network. So I'm sort of also putting together surveys later that will go out in the next couple of weeks to months, sort of asking folks to indicate if they want a mentor, what type of mentor would they want, and then using that to sort of make very intentional and thoughtful pairings. And not just to pair people up and then let them, go on their merry way. I'm also interested in putting together programs to talk about how to get the most out of a mentorship relationship, right? How do you measure progress? How do you, again, sort of with a lot of intentionality, manage that relationship? How do you graduate out of that relationship when the time has come, for, it to sort of move on to the next phase? So this is something that's in development. I recently came onto this role, but I'm really glad that there's a lot of interest and excitement in people engaging in this community in that way. So stay tuned.
Awesome.
Thank you.
I see a question in the chat about international students at U.S. institutions. Yes, you are still eligible to be a member of Nspn. And then what was the other question?
We have one more question about how, oh, sorry, we already answered that. International students, I missed one in the chat. Oh, sorry, guys.
Yeah, I think that was the one I just mentioned.
Okay, what are ways we can build our networks in this virtual world?
Yeah, great question. I mean, Nspn has actually been working on a virtual basis pre-COVID, so a lot of our network is already meant to be growing on a virtual way. I kind of make the joke to my friends that I knew all about Zoom before COVID happened because Nspn trained me on it. So definitely Nspn is one way to kind of get your network going, and I'm sure our panelists might have other like ideas for you to get more connected to.
One way to think about it is,
Go ahead.
oh, please go ahead. You go ahead.
No, go ahead.
Oh, one way to think about it is starting local and building your way out. So perhaps there is a local science policy group at your institution. If there's not one at your institution, there may be one at a neighboring institution in your city that I'm sure they'd be more than happy to have you, attend, their virtual events. Twitter, I found actually to be a really rich place to sort of see who's who in the field. So following hashtag SciPol or hashtag advocacy, you often learn about webinars and talks and programs. For example, today there's an ESEP happy hour. I forget what ESEP even stands for, honestly. East Coast Policy. Does anyone remember what ESEP stands for? Anyway.
Engaging scientists and engineers in policy.
Thank you. Right, and so they host, I think, monthly happy hours and such. Then branching out a little bit farther from that, LinkedIn is a great place to just, reach out to people through the LinkedIn message bot, folks that are alumni of a science policy program, folks that are early career professionals, folks that are alumni of your institution. Hey, a little bit of background about who I am. I'm curious. Can I have 20 minutes of your time? And sort of start building out from there. And then certainly Nspn has a ton of events, and committees just for you to start like having those conversations. But in my mind, I think in a virtual world, the accessibility of all of these folks to me has actually increased because everyone's so used to now, hopping on a Zoom or answering the phone or writing emails. And so no worries that somehow you're going to be at a disadvantage because it's all virtual. In many ways, people that might have been more difficult to access are now more accessible to access.
That's very true, actually. Yeah. Okay, let me see more questions.
Yes, we have a couple more. One question is, if you're sure about a career in science policy early in your doctoral degree, should you continue or how should you get transitioned into science policy?
That's a good question, and I think it really depends individually on your interests and needs. I think I don't think you necessarily have to complete a PhD if you're miserable in your PhD and it's causing you a lot of unhappiness. Then you don't need a PhD to be successful in science policy. Many have masters in science. There are people I know who are doing state level science policy who only have a bachelor's degree, and they are superstars and rock stars in that world. So I think it's very much a personal choice, but there are a lot of ways you can get involved. I mean, obviously it's very dependent upon an advisor who's open, and I understand completely that there's some who are a little bit more limiting and things you can do outside of the lab. If you have any opportunity to join organizations on your campus or do some of these, graduate level policy fellowships that you can do while in school, then you're sort of, having both, sides of the coin at one time. You're still completing your PhD, but you're getting some of this experience, and being involved with Nsbn and getting on the committees allows you to start getting to know people while you're still in your graduate program as well. So I think it's a very personal decision. I don't think you have to feel like you have to slug through a doctoral program if it's not for you. I think it's totally okay to, and maybe it's not a popular opinion, but I think it's totally okay to say, I want a science policy career. I don't think this PhD is going to give me anything more than I already have, and I want to go forward, and I think you could be successful that way.
That's all we have in the Q&A. If anyone has any final questions they want to share, please do so at this time.
Piggybacking off what
Oh, go for
Just
it.
to quickly piggyback off what Delara said about, how to get engaged now. At the core of science policy engagement is communication, and outreach. And so if there are activities, on your campus or in your local community that involve talking to non-academic experts about your work and why it's interesting, like engage in that. If there's an opportunity to summarize your science in layman's, terms or plain language, to practice basically making your science accessible and serving in a variety of different, ways as a science ambassador, as a science translator. So even if you're like, man, I don't know if there's like policy or advocacy in my area, you can always be a translator. You can always be practicing learning how to communicate science to different, audiences. And that definitely builds like a core set of skills that would be useful later when you have a more like policy-centered opportunity.
And I'll just say the SciPol scholars are all remote, they're virtual. You could set up a similar kind of fellowship scholarship with a local office. District offices are always looking for people who can create figures and analyze data or create infographics for various things. So you can definitely engage virtually with a local office.
And to answer the question in the chat about lots of these opportunities being in DC, yes, but at least for the ORISE fellowships, a lot of them are located in federal agency locations that aren't necessarily in DC. I mean, if you're at the CDC, you might be in Atlanta or you might be in Fort Collins, Colorado, where the national, the vector-borne diseases are and things like that. And then state level policy fellowships that are opening up. If you live in a state, some of them don't require you to be a resident of that state, so you can be in a different state that might interest you. But yeah, there are a lot that are in DC, but virtual world, like Derek said, you might be able to find more virtual opportunities right now in science policy than you did previously.
We did make a word cloud out of the out of all the let me see. I don't know if you, Brianna, do you have it that you can share it? Because I can also share my screen.
You can share your screen, Amanda.
Yeah.
You have to stop share mine.
Yeah, you do. But yeah, Derek was very fast at making a word cloud out of all of the words that you guys mentioned represent science policy. And we just wanted to quickly share that to kind of wrap up all of the different ways that science policy can affect society and impact life through so many different ways, more than the ones that you might immediately come to mind. Science policy is involved in so many different, and pretty much everything. I don't know, I say everything. Cool. Okay, I think that's all we have on our end. If any questions come up, we have put in our names and emails in the chat at various moments throughout the discussion. Again, my email is amanda@scipolnetwork.org. If anybody needs anything, reach me there. Reach me on Twitter, AM Acosta Ruiz on Twitter. Just AM and my 2 last names. If you guys want to share your Twitter handles or email, feel free to do that as well. Yeah. Okay. Bye, everybody, then. Thank you all.